You go from all this time with me. What was your point where you said, I'm gonna leave RCR and go to work for Joe Gibbs?
Actually, we were out. Richard had moved things around or whatever, and it was we were getting ready. We had maybe a week off or something, and then we were getting ready to go to Indy that week, and then Richard called me in the office, or Richard didn't call me. Richard was flying back from somewhere, and his plane broke down, and I guess they had decided that they were going to make a change on the 31 car, which I was there with Jeff Burton, and in about 35 seconds, they sent me down the highway, and that was it. So I found my own way.
Yeah. So you find your own way, and you wind up at Joe Gibbs Racing.
Yeah.
So, talk to me about the difference in the, when you started, you were hired to do what?
At
Joe Gibbs.
At JGR. I was, Todd Meredith was the guy running the company at the time, and he was the everything. He was the CEO, he was the CFO, he was the competition director, he was the engineering director. He kind of did everything. And he had been on me when I was at Furniture Row for those 3 years about coming back and doing something for them and helping them, like just on the aero side of things, in the fab shop and stuff like that. Well, I was still crew chief, and at the time I wasn't that ready to do it. But then I finally decided, you know what, I'm going to go and do that. So I came there and was virtually worked with him hand in hand, just looking at all the different things. And another guy that we had at RCR, Kyle McClenathan, he was one of our aero guys there. He came along as well. So him and I just kind of, we had kind of free range to just, interject our thoughts into everything. And so we just worked really hard on the aero side of things, just developing new cars and things like that. And so I came there just to really help them, look at a developmental side of things from, a different perspective, just because I'd been somewhere else.
So you go through this whole time, and I think the part that a lot of people are interested in nowadays that have seen this car go on its third year, what are the differences between what you had to what you have today, as far as the processes and things that you have to work on in the shop, and how you build the cars and all the things that go with that?
Well, prior to this car, it was a lot more fun, right? I think for people that like to fabricate and all those kind of people, we built every part of that car. Like, we built the drive shaft. We built, you didn't buy anything. You didn't buy anything from anyone that you weren't required to buy. You would just build it. So you got to really polish and, make lighter and make nicer every part and piece of the car. And so you had a lot of pride in that, right? So then that car goes away. And you're doing really well with it. We're winning races, doing really well with it, and always innovating and, building new car after new car after new car, new design after new design, which is really cool. And then you go to this where we get everything handed to us. And so now, all the things that you used to take pride in, you have to buy from someone else that's taking pride in it or not, right?
Right.
So, and you get all these parts that are, you get all the same parts that every other team has. And so now it's just a matter of the puzzles that it takes to put it all together.
And how much harder has that made that puzzle? Because the increments
it's ridiculous. The work that goes into it is ridiculous. And, now in fairness, it teaches you so many things because the box is so tight. You realize, okay, well, now I can't develop that. I have to develop how I race the car and what I do with the car and all that. So, God, if we could just go back in time to 2000 or 2006, it would be ugly.
Stalls all the clips off.
It would be ugly. You would just learn so much more because you're forced to just overturn every rock. You're forced to just we're picking the smallest of details out of everything all of the time. And it's just it's a QC process, right? That's what it is. Your job is QCing the parts that you get and deciding where you're going to race them and what they're good for and what track they're not good for and things like that. So it's ridiculously hard because,
is there a big variance in them?
There's we're allowed, let's say body conformance, we're allowed 150 thousandths of an inch, right? A little more than an eighth of an inch. You'll have things that vary half of that. So half of your tolerances are used up in some parts variations and things like that. So you got to decide, okay, well, which part's the best to use where? Because, I think I told you before, they're all identically different.
Right.
So, they're identical parts, but they're all different. So, that's where it becomes just a QC thing. So
when you say QC, quality control, is the quality would the quality control in today's parts world, would that have even met the quality? Would it have ever made it to a car that you used to build before next gen? Or the tolerance is too far out?
Yeah. So I think in an old car, the only thing that, I mean, we're resolving down to things that you would resolve down on the engine side of things back then, piston clearances and bearing clearances and things like that. Not anything like that we do on components and parts and pieces. So, it's like it's way more finite.
So when you talk about the quality control of the cars and the processes that you guys have had to change, what do you think that the biggest differences in that you've had to explain to the drivers in what they need to do different? And I mean, these people that listen to our show, they know I'm a Denny Hamlin fan because of his work ethic and the things that he does in the car, and Chris Gabehart. I think that when you talk about the training process, for me, it was like starting over.
Right.
Is that how you would view it for your drivers?
Absolutely. I think the more that you knew and the better off you were at your racecraft and things like that, probably the more detriment you had. Because now, you're looking at simulators and simulation tools, and there's a, theoretical perfect way of getting the car around the tracks. And now Denny or Kevin Harvick or whoever, they have to concede to the fact that they have to do it the way the car needs it done instead of the way they want to do it, I think. And so, and that's all based on your setup and whatever. Like, you can still drive it a different way, but there's really only one way that setup is going to be able to be driven. And so, Denny will spend his whole life, or Ty or Christopher or whatever, in a simulator, like, running laps and laps and laps and hours and hours and hours. It's a crazy amount of work that it takes. I think, you could have probably gotten, I know, when we started and you first started cup racing, there was probably time to squeeze a golf game in or something during the week. Now it's like, any free time is spent, developing what you're going to do with your engineers and your team on this upcoming weekend or closing out the weekend prior.
Yeah. What makes those two, Chris and Denny, like, what makes them better? I'm not saying they're better than your guys, but what makes them better than most?
I think, Denny's commitment to it and Chris's commitment to it. And then it's firstly a trust that Denny has that, as trust that Denny
changed
has.
His career.
Yeah, for sure. That just like, okay, if that's what he tells me to do, I'm going to do it. And I think, there's he had to. And I think when Chris came into this, he was Xfinity crew chief, and he came into it as a cup crew chief, and Denny kind of handed him the reins on it. And like I've said a lot of times, we fell on our own terms. He's been able to fall on his own terms, and Denny's bought into everything that he tells him, and he just goes and does that. So
how does Joe fit into this equation? Because it's there's such a balance, in my opinion, between what the competition side believes. You got to get your drivers to buy into it. But there's a work ethic that comes with the driver side of it, the team side of it, the crew chief side of it. How does Joe manage all that? It's obviously it's different for Joe because of Ty. It adds another dynamic in there, but it never seems like it phases Joe. It always seems like he has an answer to the question and how to get the most out of his people.
Well, Joe's, I think, football's taught him that, how to deal with people and egos and things like that, right? And so to be good at this, I think it takes it takes a little bit of an ego. It takes a little bit of confidence and things like that. Joe, that doesn't faze Joe at all. And then Joe will work harder than any person you've ever met in your life. I mean, he puts the work in, and he's really not involved in competition at all. He's just, he wants to, when you come off of a weekend that's not good in a competition meeting, he'll want to know, okay, what was the problem? And do we have something in mind that we're going to fix it? What are we working towards? How are we going to fix it? As long as we have a plan, Joe's perfectly fine. And so he's out beating doors trying to cubic dollars because it takes a lot to make that monster run.
So he's never yelled at you.
Oh no, he'll yell a little bit.
Does he?
Oh yeah, he'll get wound up.
I've
a little
heard
bit.
Ty told us some great stories.
He'll get wound up a little bit. Yeah, Joe, he's passionate about it, so he'll yell at it. Not like Richard yelling. It's different. Yeah. It's a different yell.
Not like that time that you figured out that the washers would actually work in the Coke machine.
No, not that time. No. No.
Hey, race fans, thanks for watching our video. For all NASCAR on Fox News, content, and the best clips from Fox Sports, be sure to follow and subscribe to our channel.